Journalist attacks Trump's business past. An old employee stands up and reveals the truth. The morning started like any other for Mike Davidson. He pulled into the parking lot of Joey's Diner at 6:45 a.m., just like he had every Tuesday for the past 8 years since retiring. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease welcomed him as he pushed open the glass door, its bell chiming overhead. "Morning, Mike," Joey himself called from behind the counter, already reaching for the coffee pot. "The usual?" "You know it." Mike nodded, settling into his regular booth by the window. The vinyl seat cushions squeaked under his weight, worn smooth from years of loyal customers. At 68, Mike had developed a comfortable routine. The diner was his morning sanctuary, a place where he could ease into the day with a hot cup of coffee and his morning news feed. He pulled out his phone, adjusting his reading glasses as he scrolled through the headlines. "Here you go, Mike. Coffee, black as your ex, wife's heart." Joey set down the steaming mug with a grin. Mike chuckled, wrapping his weathered hands around the warm ceramic. "Thanks, Joey. Sarah ain't that bad nowadays. Kids getting married has a way of smoothing things over." "Speaking of the kids, how's Jenny doing with the new baby?" "Oh, you should see him, Joey. Getting bigger every day. Jenny says he's already trying to crawl, if you can believe it." Their conversation was interrupted by the clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and Rosa, the morning waitress, rushing past with plates balanced on both arms. The diner was starting to fill up with the usual crowd, contractors grabbing breakfast before heading to job sites, office workers stopping in for coffee, retired folks like Mike settling in for their morning ritual. Mike took a sip of his coffee and returned to his phone, scrolling past the usual mix of local news and national headlines. A notification popped up from his news app. Breaking. Former Trump Organization employees reveal pattern of abuse and fraud. His thumb hesitated over the headline. Mike had worked for the Trump Organization for 23 years before retiring, serving as facilities manager for several properties. He tapped the notification, and the article filled his screen. The City Times exclusive. Inside Trump's Business Empire, a legacy of broken promises and worker exploitation. By Lisa Brooks. Special investigation. Mike's brow furrowed as he began to read. The coffee in his stomach turned sour. "Everything all right there, Mike?" Joey called from behind the counter, noticing his regular customer's change in demeanor. "You're looking like someone just told you the Cowboys won the Super Bowl." Mike didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the article with growing disbelief. The words seemed to jump off the screen. Systematic abuse, wage theft, hostile work environment, pattern of fraudulent practices. "I don't believe this garbage," he muttered, loud enough for Joey to hear. The diner owner walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. "What's got you all worked up?" Mike held up his phone. "Some reporter writing lies about where I worked for most of my life, the Trump Organization, making it sound like it was some kind of sweatshop." Joey slid into the booth across from Mike, sensing his friend needed to talk. "That bad, huh?" "Listen to this," Mike said, his voice tight with anger. Former employees describe a toxic culture of fear and intimidation, where workers were routinely denied basic rights and benefits. "That's complete bull, Joey. I managed over 60 people in my department. We had full benefits, good pay, Christmas bonuses every year." "Maybe they're talking about different departments?" Joey suggested, trying to be diplomatic. Mike shook his head, scrolling further through the article. "No, they're painting the whole operation with the same brush. Wait, who did they even talk to?" His eyes narrowed as he read the names. "Tom Wilson? Pete Ramirez? Sarah Henderson? You've got to be kidding me. You know them?" "Know them?" Mike let out a bitter laugh. "Wilson and Ramirez were caught stealing equipment from one of our renovation projects. Must have been 2002, 2003? Henderson was fired for falsifying overtime records. And now they're sources for some big expose?" The bell above the door chimed as more customers entered. Joey glanced over his shoulder, then back at Mike. "That doesn't sound right, printing stuff without checking the other side." "Oh, it gets better," Mike continued, his face reddening as he read. "They're claiming the company regularly stiffed contractors. But they're not mentioning the ones who tried to double bill us or delivered substandard materials. I personally had to deal with those investigations." Rosa appeared at their table, notepad in hand. Your usual breakfast, Mike? He nodded absently, still focused on the article. Joey stood up to return to his duties, patting Mike's shoulder. Don't let it get to you too much. Nobody believes everything they read anymore anyway. But Mike couldn't let it go. As he waited for his breakfast, he read through the article 3 more times. Each reading revealed new accusations that made his blood boil. The reporter, Lisa Brooks, had woven together a narrative that painted his former workplace as a den of corruption and exploitation. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Bill Thompson, his former assistant manager. Mike, you seeing this hit piece? Bill's voice was as angry as Mike felt. Reading it right now. Can you believe they're quoting Wilson and that bunch? It's a hatchet job, pure and simple. Karen from HR just called me. She's furious. Says Brooks never even tried to contact the HR department for comment. Mike's breakfast arrived. 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, hash browns. But he barely noticed. What are they saying at the office? It's chaos. PR department's phones are ringing off the hook. Media's having a field day with it. Social media's even worse. They're making us all look like monsters or victims, depending on which side they're on. Rosa stopped by to refill Mike's coffee. He realized he'd let his first cup go cold, too caught up in the article and phone call. You know what really gets me? Bill continued. Remember Maria from accounting? Of course. Sweetest lady you'd ever meet. How's she doing? Still in remission. Thank God. But get this. The article mentions an employee being denied medical leave for cancer treatment. They don't name names, but they're clearly trying to imply something sinister. Meanwhile, the company didn't just give Maria leave. They covered treatments insurance wouldn't pay for. I was there when Mr. Trump himself told her not to worry about the bills. Mike pushed his plate away, appetite gone. This Brooks person, she's got an agenda. Has to. Obviously. But who's going to listen to us? We're just the people who actually worked there. The diner had filled up completely now, the morning rush in full swing. The clatter of dishes and hum of conversations would normally be comforting to Mike, but today, it all felt like static in his head. Hold on, Bill. Got another call coming in. Mike switched lines. Hello? Dad? It was his daughter Jenny. Are you okay? I just saw that article everyone's sharing. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just angry. You know none of that stuff is true, right? Of course I know that, Dad. I grew up hearing your stories about work. But people are already sharing it everywhere. Someone in my mommy group just posted about how she's not surprised, saying terrible things about your old boss. Mike pinched the bridge of his nose. Jenny had been proud of his career, had even done a school report once about working in property management because of him. The thought of her having to defend him or his workplace made his stomach turn. Don't worry about it, Jenny. How's my grandson doing? Don't change the subject, Dad. I know that tone. You're planning something. Mike smiled despite his anger. Jenny could always read him like a book. Planning? No. Just thinking. Dad. I got to go, sweetie. Give the baby a kiss for me. Mike ended the call and stared out the window at the parking lot, watching people hurry in and out of the diner. 23 years. 23 years of his life spent helping to build and maintain those properties. He'd started as a maintenance worker and worked his way up to facilities manager. He'd hired people, trained them, watched them grow in their careers. He'd been there through renovations, upgrades, crisis management, and everyday operations. His phone buzzed again. A text from Karen in HR. Are you seeing this? It's horrible. They're making us look like villains. Another text came in from George, one of his former maintenance workers. Boss, please tell me you're going to do something about these lies. Then another from Luis, a security supervisor he'd hired. Mr. Davidson, my kids are asking me if I was a bad person for working there. This isn't right. More messages kept coming in. People he'd worked with, people he'd trained, people whose careers he'd helped build. All of them angry, hurt, and feeling powerless against this tidal wave of accusations. Joey stopped by his table again. You've been sitting here for 2 hours, Mike. That's a record, even for you. And your breakfast is cold. Mike looked up at his friend. You got a phone number for the City Times? Oh, you sure about that? Never been more sure of anything. Joey pulled out his phone and did a quick search. Here you go. But Mike, take a breath first. Getting angry at some reporter isn't going to help. Mike wrote down the number. I'm not angry, Joey. Well, I am, but that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because somebody needs to tell the truth. The real truth, not this twisted version. He left enough cash on the table to cover his barely touched breakfast and a generous tip. Standing up, he pulled on his jacket and gathered his phone and the piece of paper with the newspaper's number. Thanks for the coffee, Joey. Might need a rain check on that breakfast. Where you headed? Mike paused at the door. Home. Got some boxes in the attic I need to dig through. 23 years of paperwork. Figured it was just taking up space. But looks like I kept it for a reason after all. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door. In the parking lot, his phone buzzed with more messages from former coworkers, but he didn't check them. He had work to do. Real work, like the kind he'd done for 23 years, fixing things that were broken, setting the record straight, making sure the truth came out. The morning sun was fully up now, burning away the last traces of dawn. Mike sat in his car for a moment, looking at the newspaper's phone number. His hand wasn't shaking anymore. The initial shock and anger had burned away, replaced by something else, determination. He started his car and pulled out of the parking lot. The boxes in his attic contained 2 decades of records, photos, correspondence, and documentation. He'd kept them out of habit the way his father had taught him to keep records of everything important. You never know when you'll need to prove what really happened, his dad used to say. As he drove home, Mike thought about all the people who'd worked alongside him over the years. Good people, honest people, people who'd taken pride in their work and been treated fairly for it, people whose story was being erased by this reporter's article. His phone rang again, hands-free through the car's speakers this time. It was Bill again. Mike, you still there? Yeah, Bill, I'm here, and I'm going to fix this. How? They won't listen to us. We're just the little people. Mike turned onto a street, his modest house coming into view. Maybe that's exactly why they need to listen to us. The little people built those buildings, maintained them, kept them running. And I've got the papers to prove every single thing that really happened. You kept records? Everything, Bill. Every repair order, every contractor dispute, every HR resolution. Even got photos from all those Christmas parties they're saying never happened. Time to show this reporter what real investigative work looks like. He pulled into his driveway and turned off the car. Through his windshield, he could see his attic window, where 23 years of truth sat waiting in cardboard boxes. You really think they'll listen? Bill asked. Mike opened his car door. They're going to have to, because I'm not going to stop until they do. He ended the call and walked to his front door, keys in hand. The truth was up there in his attic, and it was time to bring it down into the light. The reporter wanted a story? He'd give her one. The real one, backed up by 2 decades of proof. As he unlocked his door, his phone buzzed one more time. A text from Jenny. Be careful, Dad, but give 'em hell. Mike smiled. He hadn't felt this energized since retirement. Sometimes a man had to stand up for what was right, no matter what anyone thought of him for doing it. And Mike Davidson had spent 23 years standing up for what was right. It was time to do it one more time. Mike's house was quiet, except for the creak of the pull-down attic stairs. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he climbed up. The musty smell of old cardboard and paper greeted him, along with the stifling heat that always collected under the roof. Now, where did I put those boxes? He muttered, sweeping the flashlight beam across the cramped space. There, in the corner behind an old Christmas tree stand, he spotted the familiar brown boxes labeled Work Docs in his neat block handwriting. His phone rang again as he was pulling the first box closer. It was Karen from HR. Mike, have you seen what they're saying on social media now? It's getting worse. He wedged the phone between his ear and shoulder as he opened the box. I'm a little busy right now, Karen. Busy? With what? Finding the truth. He pulled out a stack of folders, their labels faded but still readable. Hey, you still have access to the HR database? I'm retired, Mike, just like you. But you kept copies of everything, didn't you? Just like you always told us to do? There was a pause on the other end. Maybe I did. What exactly are you looking for? Mike smiled as he found what he was searching for, a folder marked Wilson Ramirez Incident 2002. Everything, Karen. I'm looking for everything. The next few hours passed in a blur of paper and dust. Mike carried box after box down to his dining room table, creating neat piles of documents, performance reviews, security reports, maintenance logs, photos from company events, thank you letters from employees, medical leave approvals, safety inspection reports. His daughter Jenny stopped by around noon, carrying his grandson. "Dad, what are you doing?" She surveyed the paper-covered table with wide eyes. "This looks like one of those conspiracy walls from the movies." Mike looked up from a stack of contractor invoices. "It's not a conspiracy, sweetheart. It's history. Our history. Look at this." He held up a photo from 2001. It showed a large group of employees at the annual Christmas party, everyone smiling, some wearing Santa hats. The article says there were never any holiday celebrations, that it was all work and no appreciation. Well, here's 20 years of Christmas parties that say different. Jenny shifted the baby to her other hip, picking up another photo. "Is that you? With the mustache?" "Hey, that mustache was very fashionable back then," Mike protested, then made a face at his grandson who giggled. "Here, look at this one." He pulled out a letter written on company letterhead, dated 2003. "This is from Maria, in accounting, thanking the company for covering her cancer treatments." The article tried to spin some story about denied medical leave. Well, here's the proof that shows exactly the opposite. "Dad," Jenny's voice was concerned, "what are you planning to do with all this?" Mike sat back in his chair, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I'm going to show it to the reporter who wrote that hit piece. Make her see what really happened." "And you think she'll listen?" "She'll have to. Because I've got something she doesn't. Proof. Real proof. Not just angry quotes from disgruntled ex-employees." His phone buzzed. Another text from Bill. "Channel 5 is running with the story now. They're outside the old office building trying to get comments." Mike's jaw tightened. He stood up and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out a fresh manila folder. "Dad?" Jenny watched him with concern. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just realizing something. This isn't just about defending the company anymore. It's about all the good people who worked there. People who took pride in their jobs, who built careers there, who supported their families with those paychecks. They deserve to have their story told too." He began carefully selecting documents from the piles, placing them in the manila folder. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall of truth he was building. "You always taught me to stand up for what's right," Jenny said softly. Mike looked at his daughter, then at his grandson sleeping peacefully in her arms. "That's because my father taught me the same thing, and someday this little guy will learn it too." He closed the folder and picked up his phone. It was time to make that call to the City Times. Time to speak up for all the voices that weren't being heard. Time to show that sometimes the truth was more complicated and more important than a simple headline. The afternoon sun slanted through his dining room windows, illuminating the scattered documents on his table. 23 years of memories, of hard work, of real people living real lives. And somewhere in the City Times office, a reporter named Lisa Brooks was about to learn that every story has more than one side. Mike took a deep breath and dialed the number. Joey's Diner looked different at 7:45 a.m. on Wednesday morning. The usual breakfast crowd was there, but the atmosphere felt charged, electric. Mike sat in his regular booth. But nothing about this morning was regular. His cardboard box of documents sat on the seat beside him, and 3 manila folders lay neatly arranged on the table. "More coffee, Mike?" Rosa asked, coffee pot hovering uncertainly over his untouched cup. "Not yet, Rosa. Waiting for someone." The bell above the door chimed. Mike didn't need to look up to know it was her. The sudden hush in conversations told him everything. Lisa Brooks walked into Joey's Diner like she was walking into a courtroom, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor, her blazer perfectly pressed, a leather messenger bag slung over her shoulder. Their eyes met across the diner. Mike saw recognition flash across her face. She'd obviously looked him up, probably found his employee photos in the company archives. "Mr. Davidson?" She approached his booth, hand extended professionally. Mike didn't stand. "Miss Brooks, you're early." "So are you." She slid into the seat across from him, glancing at the folders on the table. "I assume those are the documents you mentioned?" "Some of them." Mike nodded toward the cardboard box. "Got plenty more right here." Joey appeared at their table, coffee pot in hand. "Can I get you folks anything?" Lisa started to shake her head, but Mike cut in. 2 coffees, Joey. This might take a while. Joey's eyes darted between them, understanding dawning on his face. He'd heard enough of Mike's phone calls yesterday to know what this meeting was about. Coming right up. Lisa pulled out a small digital recorder. Do you mind if I record our conversation? Only if you promise to record all of it, not just the parts that fit your story. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her professional smile. Mr. Davidson, I assure you that my reporting is thorough, and… Let me stop you right there. Mike opened the first folder. Your reporting isn't thorough. It's not even close. You talked to 3 disgruntled ex-employees and took their word as gospel. Never bothered to dig deeper, did you? Never thought to ask why they might have access to grind? Our sources were thoroughly vetted. Were they? Mike pulled out a stack of photographs. These are security camera stills from the 15th of March, 2002. That's Tom Wilson and Pete Ramirez loading company equipment into their personal trucks at 2 a.m. Here's the police report that followed. Here's their termination paperwork. Still think they're reliable sources? Lisa picked up the photos, her reporter's eyes scanning every detail. They claimed they were authorized to. They weren't, and you would have known that if you'd bothered to check. Mike pulled out more documents. Here's the inventory list of everything they stole. Here's the insurance claim. Here's the letter from their lawyer trying to cut a deal to avoid prosecution. Joey returned with their coffee. Lisa hadn't touched the photos yet, but her professional facade had cracked slightly. What about Sarah Henderson? She challenged. Are you going to tell me she was lying too? See for yourself. Mike opened the second folder. These are the timesheets she submitted. These are the security logs showing when she actually entered and left the building. She was claiming overtime for hours she never worked. When HR confronted her, she threatened to make up stories about workplace harassment. Lisa's hand moved toward her recorder, but Mike wasn't finished. But let's talk about what you didn't report. Let's talk about Maria from accounting. The woman who was denied medical leave for cancer treatment? That's thoroughly documented in our… Mike's laugh was sharp. Denied medical leave? Is that what you think happened? He pulled out a letter written on company letterhead, dated 2003. Read it. Out loud. Lisa picked up the letter, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned it. Go on, Mike insisted. Read it. She cleared her throat. Dear Mr. Trump and management, I don't know how to express my gratitude for everything you've done. When my insurance denied coverage for my experimental treatment, I thought all hope was lost. Your generosity in covering the full cost of my treatment has given me a second chance at life. Thanks to you, I will see my daughter graduate. Her voice trailed off. Keep going. We'll see my daughter graduate college next spring. The support from everyone in the company, from management to my fellow employees who donated their vacation days to extend my medical leave, has touched my heart deeply. You've shown that this company is more than a workplace. It's a family. Lisa set the letter down. This isn't what you expected? No, I suppose it isn't. Just like you didn't expect this. Mike pulled out a stack of photos. Every Christmas party from 1995 to 2018. The ones your article claims never happened. Notice anything? The same faces year after year. People don't stick around toxic workplaces, Miss Brooks. They don't build careers in places that abuse them. He opened the third folder. Want to talk about those contractors you claim were stiffed? Here's why they weren't paid. Invoices for work never completed. Materials that didn't meet specifications, double billing attempts, fraudulent charges, every single payment dispute documented, investigated, and resolved legally. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, illuminating the scattered documents on their table. The breakfast crowd had thinned, but those who remained were stealing glances at their booth, sensing something important was happening. Lisa sat back, her coffee untouched. Why are you showing me all this? Because somebody has to tell the truth. The real truth, not just the version that makes for good headlines. Mike leaned forward. You wrote about a toxic culture of fear and intimidation. I'll tell you what I feared. Letting down the people who trusted me to do my job right. The real culture was one of responsibility, of pride in our work, of taking care of each other. He pulled out his phone, opened his messages. See these? Hundreds of texts from people I worked with. Good people. Honest people. People who built careers there, supported families, sent kids to college. Your article didn't just attack a company. It attacked them. It attacked their integrity, their choices, their life's work. Lisa was silent for a long moment, looking at the evidence spread across the table. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. If all this is true, why didn't anyone come forward when we were researching the story? Did you ask? Did you reach out to current employees? Former managers? The HR department? Or did you just take the word of 3 people with grudges and run with it because it fit the story you wanted to tell? The recorder sat between them, still running. Lisa stared at it, then at the documents, then back at Mike. What do you want, Mr. Davidson? I want you to tell the truth. All of it. Not just the parts that make good headlines. These documents? He gestured at the table. They tell a different story. A real story. About real people doing honest work. About a company that wasn't perfect. No company is. But that treated people fairly and helped them when they needed it. Writing a retraction would. I don't want a retraction. I want the whole story told. The real story. With evidence, not just accusations. With documents, not just quotes from people with axes to grind. Lisa picked up Maria's letter again, rereading it silently. This would change everything. Truth has a way of doing that. She looked up at him. Why did you keep all these records? Mike smiled slightly. My father taught me to always keep proof of what really happened. Said you never know when you'll need to set the record straight. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across their table full of truth. Outside, the world was still buzzing about yesterday's explosive exposé. But here in Joey's diner, a different story was taking shape. A story backed by evidence, not allegations. A story about real people, not caricatures. A story about truth, not headlines. Lisa reached for her recorder and pressed stop. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she pressed record again. Mr. Davidson, she said, her reporter's voice now tinged with something new. Respect, maybe even a hint of humility. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Mike opened another folder. 23 years of truth were about to come out. And this time, someone was finally ready to listen. Joey's diner looked different at 7:45 a.m. on Wednesday morning. The usual breakfast crowd was there, but the atmosphere felt charged, electric. Mike sat in his regular booth, but nothing about this morning was regular. His cardboard box of documents sat on the seat beside him, and 3 manila folders lay neatly arranged on the table. More coffee, Mike? Rosa asked, coffee pot hovering uncertainly over his untouched cup. Not yet, Rosa. Waiting for someone. The bell above the door chimed. Mike didn't need to look up to know it was her. The sudden hush in conversations told him everything. Lisa Brooks walked into Joey's diner like she was walking into a courtroom, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor, her blazer perfectly pressed, a leather messenger bag slung over her shoulder. Their eyes met across the diner. Mike saw recognition flash across her face. She'd obviously looked him up, probably found his employee photos in the company archives. Mr. Davidson? She approached his booth, hand extended professionally. Mike didn't stand. Miss Brooks. You're early. So are you. She slid into the seat across from him, glancing at the folders on the table. I assume those are the documents you mentioned? Some of them. Mike nodded toward the cardboard box. Got plenty more right here. Joey appeared at their table, coffee pot in hand. Can I get you folks anything? Lisa started to shake her head, but Mike cut in. 2 coffees, Joey. This might take a while. Joey's eyes darted between them, understanding dawning on his face. He'd heard enough of Mike's phone calls yesterday to know what this meeting was about. Coming right up. Lisa pulled out a small digital recorder. Do you mind if I record our conversation? Only if you promise to record all of it, not just the parts that fit your story. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her professional smile. Mr. Davidson, I assure you that my reporting is thorough and… Let me stop you right there. Mike opened the first folder. Your reporting isn't thorough, it's not even close. You talked to 3 disgruntled ex-employees and took their word as gospel. Never bothered to dig deeper, did you? Never thought to ask why they might have axes to grind? Our sources were thoroughly vetted. Were they? Mike pulled out a stack of photographs. These are security camera stills from the 15th of March, 2002. That's Tom Wilson and Pete Ramirez loading company equipment into their personal trucks at 2 a.m. Here's the police report that followed. Here's their termination paperwork. Still think they're reliable sources? Lisa picked up the photos, her reporter's eyes scanning every detail. They claimed they were authorized to. They weren't, and you would have known that if you'd bothered to check. Mike pulled out more documents. Here's the inventory list of everything they stole. Here's the insurance claim. Here's the letter from their lawyer trying to cut a deal to avoid prosecution. Joey returned with their coffee. Lisa hadn't touched the photos yet, but her professional facade had cracked slightly. What about Sarah Henderson? She challenged. Are you going to tell me she was lying too? See for yourself. Mike opened the second folder. These are the timesheets she submitted. These are the security logs showing when she actually entered and left the building. She was claiming overtime for hours she never worked. When HR confronted her, she threatened to make up stories about workplace harassment. Lisa's hand moved toward her recorder, but Mike wasn't finished. But let's talk about what you didn't report. Let's talk about Maria from accounting. The woman who was denied medical leave for cancer treatment? That's thoroughly documented in our... Mike's laugh was sharp. Denied medical leave? Is that what you think happened? He pulled out a letter written on company letterhead, dated 2003. Read it, out loud. Lisa picked up the letter, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned it. Go on, Mike insisted. Read it. She cleared her throat. Dear Mr. Trump and management, I don't know how to express my gratitude for everything you've done. When my insurance denied coverage for my experimental treatment, I thought all hope was lost. Your generosity in covering the full cost of my treatment has given me a second chance at life. Thanks to you, I will see my daughter graduate. Her voice trailed off. Keep going. We'll see my daughter graduate college next spring. The support from everyone in the company, from management to my fellow employees, who donated their vacation days to extend my medical leave, has touched my heart deeply. You've shown that this company is more than a workplace, it's a family. Lisa set the letter down. This isn't what you expected? No, I suppose it isn't. Just like you didn't expect this. Mike pulled out a stack of photos. Every Christmas party from 1995 to 2018. The ones your article claims never happened. Notice anything? The same faces, year after year. People don't stick around toxic workplaces, Miss Brooks. They don't build careers in places that abuse them. He opened the third folder. Want to talk about those contractors you claim were stiffed? Here's why they weren't paid. Invoices for work never completed. Materials that didn't meet specifications. Double billing attempts. Fraudulent charges. Every single payment dispute documented, investigated, and resolved legally. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, illuminating the scattered documents on their table. The breakfast crowd had thinned, but those who remained were stealing glances at their booth, sensing something important was happening. Lisa sat back, her coffee untouched. Why are you showing me all this? Because somebody has to tell the truth. The real truth, not just the version that makes for good headlines. Mike leaned forward. You wrote about a toxic culture of fear and intimidation. I'll tell you what I feared. Letting down the people who trusted me to do my job right. The real culture was one of responsibility, of pride in our work, of taking care of each other. He pulled out his phone, opened his messages. See these? Hundreds of texts from people I worked with. Good people, honest people. People who built careers there, supported families, sent kids to college. Your article didn't just attack a company, it attacked them. It attacked their integrity, their choices, their life's work. Lisa was silent for a long moment, looking at the evidence spread across the table. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. If all this is true, why didn't anyone come forward when we were researching the story? Did you ask? Did you reach out to current employees, former managers, the HR department? Or did you just take the word of 3 people with grudges and run with it because it fit the story you wanted to tell? The recorder sat between them, still running. Lisa stared at it, then at the documents, then back at Mike. What do you want, Mr. Davidson? I want you to tell the truth. All of it. Not just the parts that make good headlines. These documents, he gestured at the table, they tell a different story. A real story. About real people doing honest work. About a company that wasn't perfect. No company is. But that treated people fairly and helped them when they needed it. Writing a retraction would. I don't want a retraction. I want the whole story told, the real story. With evidence, not just accusations. With documents, not just quotes from people with axes to grind. Lisa picked up Maria's letter again, rereading it silently. This would change everything. Truth has a way of doing that. She looked up at him. Why did you keep all these records? Mike smiled slightly. My father taught me to always keep proof of what really happened. Said you never know when you'll need to set the record straight. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across their table full of truth. Outside, the world was still buzzing about yesterday's explosive exposé. But here in Joey's diner, a different story was taking shape. A story backed by evidence, not allegations. A story about real people, not caricatures. A story about truth, not headlines. Lisa reached for her recorder and pressed stop. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she pressed record again. Mr. Davidson, she said. Her reporter's voice now tinged with something new, respect, maybe even a hint of humility. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Mike opened another folder. 23 years of truth were about to come out. And this time, someone was finally ready to listen. Lisa leaned forward, her professional demeanor softening slightly. You mentioned Maria from accounting. Tell me more about her case. Mike nodded, pulling out another stack of documents from his box. Maria Gonzalez started with us in 1997 as a junior accountant. By 2003, she was managing our entire accounts receivable department. That's when she got the diagnosis. He spread out a series of papers chronologically on the table. Stage 3 breast cancer. Her insurance would cover the standard treatments, but her doctor recommended an experimental procedure that showed better outcomes for her specific case. Insurance wouldn't touch it. And the company covered it? Lisa's skepticism was still evident in her voice. Not just covered it. Look at these memos. Mike pointed to a series of internal communications. When HR learned about her situation, they took it straight to the top. Within 48 hours, she had approval for full coverage of all treatments, experimental or not. But that's not even the whole story. Joey appeared at their table again. More coffee? Please, Lisa said, surprising herself. She'd been so engrossed in the documents she hadn't realized she'd finished her first cup. As Joey poured, he looked at the papers spread across the table. You telling her about Maria? Man, I remember when all that happened. Her kids used to come in here sometimes after visiting her at the hospital. Lisa looked up sharply. You knew her? Honey, everybody knew Maria. She was family. Joey set down the coffee pot. Mike, tell her about what the employees did. Mike smiled at the memory. That's the part that never made it into your article. When word got out about Maria's diagnosis, something amazing happened. People started donating their vacation days to extend her medical leave. Not just her department, everybody. Maintenance workers, security guards, executives. Pretty soon, she had enough donated time to take a full year off for treatment and recovery. He pulled out a worn piece of paper. This is the sign-up sheet that went around. Look at those names. 342 employees gave up their vacation time. Some gave all of it. Lisa picked up the sheet, her reporter's eyes scanning the columns of names and signatures. This is remarkable. That's not what your article called it. What was the phrase you used? Systemic worker exploitation? Mike's voice carried a hint of challenge. Tell me, Miss Brooks, do exploited workers give up their vacation time to help a colleague? Lisa set down the paper carefully. Mr. Davidson, I'm not finished. Mike reached into the box again. Remember Tom Wilson, one of your star witnesses? His name is on that list. He donated 3 days. This was just months before we caught him stealing equipment. That's the complexity your article missed. Even someone who later turned against the company was part of this community, this family, before he made his bad choices. The diner had grown quieter. At nearby tables, regular customers were clearly listening, though they pretended not to be. Rosa, Mike called to the waitress. You remember Maria's welcome back party? Rosa smiled broadly, pausing with her coffee pot. Of course. We catered it. Joey closed the diner early that day so we could deliver everything ourselves. The whole office was decorated with pink ribbons. Lisa's pen moved across her notepad rapidly. When was this? February 2004, Mike said, pulling out more photos. After she finished her treatments. Look at these. Every department contributed something. Maintenance built her a new desk chair with extra back support. The IT guys got her one of those fancy ergonomic keyboard setups. Security made sure she had a reserved parking spot close to the entrance. The photos showed a smiling woman surrounded by colleagues, pink ribbons everywhere, tears of joy on her face. Where is she now? Lisa asked quietly. Retired last year. Her daughter's a doctor now. The one she was afraid she wouldn't see graduate? She's an oncologist. Specifically chose that field because of what her mother went through. Lisa was silent for a moment, looking at the photos. Mr. Davidson. Still not finished. Mike pulled out another folder. Let's talk about those Christmas parties your article claims never happened. The ones that were. What did you write? Merely propaganda to mask the toxic work environment. He spread out 2 decades worth of holiday photos across the table. Every year, without fail. Not just parties, full celebrations. Employee awards, bonus announcements, family activities. See these kids sitting on Santa's lap? That's Wilson's daughter. And here's Ramirez's son winning the children's raffle. The same people you quoted saying the company never cared about employees' families. Lisa picked up one of the photos. This Santa? Is that you? Mike's face reddened slightly. For 15 years running. Started as a joke when the regular Santa called in sick. The kids liked me better, so it became my job. Tell her about the gifts, Mr. D. Rosa chimed in from nearby. Every child got something special, Mike explained. Not just generic toys. We kept lists all year of what each employee's kids were interested in. Made sure every gift meant something. And if a family was struggling, there'd always be a little extra help. Gift cards for groceries, winter coats, school supplies. Always arranged quietly, with dignity. Lisa's professional facade had completely cracked now. She stared at the photos, then at her recorder, then back at Mike. Why? Why didn't anyone tell us this when we were investigating? Because you weren't investigating. Mike's voice was firm, but not unkind. You were building a case. You had your story already written in your head. 3 disgruntled ex-employees told you what you wanted to hear, and you ran with it. Never occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, there was more to the story. He pulled out another stack of documents. Want to talk about worker exploitation? Let's talk about our education program. Every employee who wanted to improve their skills got support. English classes, technical training, college courses. The company covered it all. Here are the records. Hundreds of employees who got degrees or certifications while working for us. Lisa was scribbling frantically now, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. These programs, were they only for certain employees? Everyone. From janitors to junior executives. The only requirement was a willingness to learn. Mike smiled at a memory. Remember Pete Ramirez, your other star witness? Before he went bad, he got his associate's degree through this program. Company paid every penny. 2 years later, he was stealing from us. The article mentioned high turnover rates. Mike laughed. High turnover? Let me show you something. He pulled out a series of service awards. 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. People don't stay that long in toxic workplaces, Miss Brooks. They don't build careers in places that exploit them. The morning had stretched toward noon. The breakfast crowd had been replaced by early lunch customers, many of whom were stealing glances at the booth where history was being rewritten. Mr. Davidson, Lisa said finally, I need to ask, why did you keep all of this? All these records, photos, documents. Mike sat back, considering the question. You know what my father used to say? The truth is like a good building. It needs a solid foundation. These papers, these photos, they're the foundation of our truth. Not just mine, but everyone who worked there. Everyone who built something meaningful in that place. He gestured at a recorder. Your article, it didn't just attack a company. It attacked our legacy. Everything we built. Everything we stood for. Those 3 people you quoted? They're part of the story, sure. They made bad choices, got caught, and chose revenge over responsibility. But they're not the whole story. Not even close. Lisa looked at her watch, then at the mountain of evidence before her. This changes everything. That's what truth does, Miss Brooks. It changes things. Question is, are you willing to let it change your story? The recorder continued to run as the lunch crowd began to filter in. Outside, the world was still buzzing about yesterday's exposé. But here in Joey's diner, surrounded by 2 decades of documents and photos and memories, a different story was taking shape. A story about community, not exploitation. A story about family, not fear. A story about truth, not headlines. Mike reached into his box one last time. Now, about those contractor disputes you mentioned. The truth was going to take a while. But this time, someone was finally ready to hear it all. Mike pulled out a thick folder labeled Contractor Relations, 1995 to 2018. Your article made a big deal about unpaid contractors. Let's look at the real story behind those claims. Lisa straightened in her seat, her professional skepticism returning slightly. We have court records of multiple payment disputes. Yes, you do. Now let's look at why those disputes happened. Mike spread out a series of documents. Take the Anderson construction case from 2001. Your article mentioned they weren't paid for their work on the plaza renovation. Want to know why? He pulled out a series of photographs. These are the marble tiles they installed. Look closely. Lisa leaned forward, studying the images. They look fine to me. Really? Look at the certification papers they submitted. Mike placed another document on the table. They claimed these were grade A Italian marble. Premium quality, charged us accordingly. Know what they actually installed? He put down a laboratory analysis report. Grade C Chinese marble. Third-rate quality, known for poor wear resistance. They tried to charge us premium prices for inferior materials. When we caught them, they threatened to sue. That's the lawsuit your article cited. Lisa was taking notes rapidly. And the other cases? Similar stories. Here's the Brighton Electric dispute from 2003. More documents appeared on the table. They billed us for copper wiring but installed aluminum. Safety hazard waiting to happen. Or how about Metropolitan Plumbing in 2007? Charged us for new pipes but tried to use refurbished ones. Joey appeared at their table again. You telling her about the contractor scams? Mike, tell her about the time you caught those guys trying to sneak in the fake steel beams. Lisa's head snapped up. Fake steel beams? Mike nodded grimly. 2005 renovation project. Contractor tried to use substandard steel, falsified the certification documents, could have compromised the whole building's integrity. We didn't just refuse payment, we reported them to the authorities. He pulled out more paperwork. Here's the investigation report. They'd done it to other buildings too. Our case helped shut down their operation before someone got killed. Why wasn't this in any of the court records I found? Because they settled quietly once we showed them our evidence, just like most of these cases. Mike gestured at the documents. These contractors weren't victims, Miss Brooks. They were trying to cheat us, and when they got caught, they tried to play the victim card. Rosa brought over fresh coffee and couldn't help adding, "Tell her about the Christmas bonus incident, Mr. D." Lisa looked up from her notes. Christmas bonus incident? Mike smiled slightly. 2008, height of the financial crisis. Times were tough all over. We had a contractor, Westbrook Services, handling our HVAC maintenance. Good company, always did solid work. Their owner came to us, said he was having trouble making payroll, might have to lay people off right before Christmas. He pulled out more documentation. Know what happened? The company advanced them their next year's contract payments, helped them keep their people employed through the recession. They're still our contractors today. That's not the kind of story I heard while investigating. No, I expect you didn't, because stories like that don't fit the narrative you were looking for. Mike's voice wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. You wanted tales of exploitation and abuse, so that's what you found. Lisa was silent for a moment, looking at the mountain of evidence before her. These documents, they tell a very different story than what we published. They tell the true story. Not perfect, no business is. But a story of people trying to do things the right way, of standing by our workers, our contractors, our community. The lunch crowd was in full swing now. The clatter of dishes and buzz of conversations filled the diner. But at their booth, time seemed to stand still. "Mr. Davidson," Lisa said finally, "if you had all this evidence, all these documents, why didn't you come forward when we first published the allegations?" Mike leaned back, considering her question. "Because I thought the truth would speak for itself. I thought people would remember the good things, the real things. I thought." He paused, looking at the photos spread across the table. "I thought 23 years of doing right by people would matter more than the accusations of a few who did wrong." He looked her straight in the eye. "But I was wrong about that. Sometimes the truth needs a champion. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight for it." Lisa's recorder was still running, capturing every word. Outside, the world was still talking about her explosive exposé. But here in this booth, surrounded by evidence of a different reality, something was changing. "There's more," Mike said, reaching for another folder. "Let's talk about the employee development programs your article claimed were window dressing." The truth was far from finished, but now, finally, it had a chance to be heard. Lisa Brooks sat at her desk in the City Times newsroom, staring at her computer screen. It was 2 a.m., and she'd been rewriting this article for the past 6 hours. Coffee cups littered her desk, and printouts of Mike Davidson's documents covered every available surface. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her editor. "Where's the follow-up piece? The morning deadline is approaching." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you tell the world you got it wrong? Not just wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. The newsroom was almost empty at this hour. A few night desk reporters moved quietly between the cubicles, but mostly she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of what she had to do. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother. "Honey, I just saw you on the morning show replay. You looked so confident talking about that Trump story. I'm proud of you." Lisa's stomach twisted. That interview felt like a lifetime ago, even though it was just yesterday morning. Before Mike Davidson and his box of truth had turned her world upside down. She opened a new document and began to type. "Correction and follow up. The truth behind yesterday's Trump Organization exposé." By Lisa Brooks. She deleted it. Started again. "When journalists get it wrong, a lesson in truth and responsibility." Delete. Again. "The story behind the story. What we missed in our Trump Organization investigation." Her editor appeared beside her desk, coffee in hand. "Lisa, it's late. What's going on?" "James, we got it wrong." She gestured at the document surrounding her. "All of it. Those sources we trusted, they lied to us, and I have proof." James set down his coffee and picked up one of the photos, the one of Maria from accounting at her welcome back party. "Walk me through it." For the next hour, Lisa explained everything Mike had shown her. The real stories behind the contractor disputes, the employee development programs, the medical leave policies, the Christmas parties, the community they'd built. "This is..." James trailed off, looking at Maria's thank you letter. "A nightmare? A disaster? The end of my career?" "The truth." He looked at her seriously. "And we have to print it." Lisa turned back to her computer and started typing again. "Yesterday, the City Times published an investigation into the Trump Organization's business practices. Today, we're publishing something more important, the truth." Her phone buzzed. "Mike Davidson. Still working on it?" "Yes, it's harder than I thought it would be." "Truth usually is. That's why it matters." She looked at the photos spread across her desk. Decades of Christmas parties, employee celebrations, community events. All the evidence she should have found in her original investigation, if she'd only looked for it. "I'm going to lose readers over this," she said quietly. "Maybe," Mike replied. "But you'll gain something more important." "What's that?" "Integrity. Trust. The things that really matter in your line of work." As the night deepened toward morning, Lisa wrote. She wrote about Maria and her cancer treatment, about the education programs that helped employees build better lives, about contractors who were caught trying to cheat and others who were helped through hard times. She wrote about Tom Wilson and Pete Ramirez, this time including the security footage and police reports that showed why they were really fired. About Sarah Henderson and her fraudulent overtime claims, But mostly, she wrote about the community she'd missed in her rush to publish a sensational story. The family of workers who donated their vacation time to help a colleague. The Christmas parties where children sat on Mike Davidson's lap as Santa. The quiet acts of kindness that never made headlines. At 5 a.m., her phone buzzed again. Jenny, Mike's daughter. Dad's awake. He wants to know if you need him to verify anything else. Lisa looked at the article on her screen. Tell him. Tell him I'm trying to do right by the truth. His truth. He says that's all anyone can ask. The morning light was beginning to creep into the newsroom when Lisa finally finished. She read the article one last time. A correction, an apology, and the full story. By Lisa Brooks. Journalism is about finding the truth. Sometimes that means admitting when we get it wrong. Yesterday, the City Times published my investigation into the Trump Organization's business practices. Today, I'm publishing a different story. One backed by extensive documentation, photographs, and first-hand accounts that paint a very different picture of the company and its treatment of employees. This isn't a retraction. It's something more important. It's the whole truth. James appeared at her desk again. Ready? Lisa looked at the photos one more time. All those smiling faces, all those Christmas parties, all those moments of community she'd dismissed as propaganda. Ready. She hit send. Within hours, the new article was live. Her phone started buzzing immediately. Colleagues, other reporters, social media notifications. Everyone had an opinion. Selling out? Lost your nerve? Finally, someone telling the real story. Brave journalism. Career suicide. But the message that mattered most came from Mike Davidson. You did good, Miss Brooks. Truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always right. By noon, the story had gone viral for entirely different reasons than her original exposé. The full story was trending. Other media outlets were picking it up, not for its sensational claims this time, but for its honest examination of how journalism can go wrong, and how it can make things right. Her editor called her into his office. The publisher wants to talk about your future with the paper. I understand, Lisa said, preparing for the worst. No, I don't think you do. James smiled slightly. They're talking Pulitzer submission. Not for yesterday's exposé. For today's piece. For having the courage to admit you were wrong and set the record straight. Lisa sat down hard in the office chair. That's not what I expected. Truth has a way of surprising us. Her phone buzzed again. Joey's Diner. Ms. Brooks, Joey here. Just wanted you to know, Mike's sitting in his regular booth reading your article. He's smiling. Lisa felt tears pricking at her eyes. Tell him thank you for teaching me what real investigative journalism looks like. She looked out the office window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, her original story was still making waves. But now a new story was spreading. A story about truth and integrity, about admitting mistakes and making them right. Her phone kept buzzing with messages and notifications, but Lisa didn't check them. Instead, she gathered her coat and bag. Where are you going? James asked. Joey's Diner. I think I owe someone a cup of coffee. As she walked out of the newsroom, Lisa Brooks felt lighter than she had in days. She'd lost something, her certainty, her pride, her belief in her own infallibility. But she'd gained something more valuable, a lesson in what journalism was really about. Not headlines, not sensations, not preconceived narratives. Just the truth, the whole truth, finally told right. And somewhere in a booth at Joey's Diner, Mike Davidson was smiling, knowing that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up for the truth to change everything. When Lisa walked into Joey's Diner 20 minutes later, the lunch crowd was in full swing. She spotted Mike in his usual booth, newspapers spread out in front of him, several people gathered around him. I told you she'd come, Joey called from behind the counter. Mike's been holding court all morning. Mike looked up as she approached. Miss Brooks, or can I call you Lisa now? After everything, I think Lisa is fine. She slid into the booth across from him. I see you've read it. 3 times. He tapped the newspaper. You didn't pull any punches, even included the part about your own biases. That was the hardest part to write, but it was true. Rosa appeared with coffee without being asked. You should see all the old employees who've been coming in today. It's like a reunion." She was right. Lisa recognized faces from the Christmas party photos, now older, but still carrying the same warm smiles. They kept stopping by Mike's booth, sharing memories, thanking him for speaking up. "Mr. D." A tall man in a construction uniform approached. "Remember me? Tony from maintenance?" "Of course." Mike stood to shake his hand. "You went through our training program. How's your own company doing?" "Growing every year. Never would have started it without the skills I learned here." Tony turned to Lisa. "You mentioned the employee development program in your article. I'm one of the success stories. Started as a janitor, company paid for my contractor's license classes. Now I employ 30 people myself." Lisa pulled out her reporter's notebook. "Some habits die hard. Would you be willing to?" Her phone buzzed. Another message from James. "You might want to turn on the television." Joey already had the diner's television tuned to the news. The anchor was discussing Lisa's new article, interviewing media experts about journalistic integrity and the responsibility to correct the record. In an unprecedented move, the City Times reporter Lisa Brooks has published a comprehensive follow-up that challenges her own previous reporting. Mike watched the coverage with a quiet smile. Looks like the truth is having its day. Lisa's phone kept buzzing. Requests for interviews. Messages from journalism schools asking her to speak. Former colleagues admitting they'd made similar mistakes. Tips about other stories that needed a second look. But the message that caught her eye was from Maria Gonzalez. "Thank you for telling our story, the real story. Would love to meet you." "She means it," Mike said, noticing Lisa's expression. "Maria's been texting me all morning. Says her daughter wants to thank you too." The door chimed and Jenny walked in, carrying Mike's grandson. "Dad, you're all over social media. Even my mommy groups are sharing the new article." "Speaking of social media," Lisa said, checking her phone, "the hashtag number #TheFullStory is still trending. People are using it to share their own experiences working at the organization." She showed him some of the posts. 25 years on the maintenance staff, put 3 kids through college with this job. Number #TheFullStory. They supported my dream of becoming an engineer, paid for my classes, gave me flexible hours. Forever grateful. Number #TheFullStory. Best years of my career. Family atmosphere, real opportunities for growth. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, for speaking up. Number #TheFullStory. Mike bounced his grandson on his knee, looking at the outpouring of support. "You know what means the most? These aren't just comments defending a company. They're people standing up for their own lives, their own choices, their own hard work." Lisa nodded. "That's what I got wrong in my first article. I was so focused on finding victims that I missed the victory stories. The people who built careers, supported families, achieved dreams." The diner's door chimed again. A group of current employees walked in, still in their work clothes. "Mr. Davidson," they called out, "we printed out the article and posted it in the break room." Mike waved them over. More coffee appeared, more chairs were pulled up. The booth became the center of an impromptu gathering. "Tell her about the scholarship program, Mr. D. And the apprenticeship initiative. Remember when we renovated Mrs. Chen's house after the flood?" Stories flowed like the coffee. Stories of community, of support, of people helping people. Lisa's notebook filled with details she'd missed in her original investigation, not because they were hidden, but because she hadn't looked for them. Her phone buzzed again. The publisher of the City Times. "The follow-up piece has crashed our website. Too much traffic. Technical team working on it." "Looks like people are hungry for good news," Joey said, refilling cups. "Or maybe just the truth." Mike smiled at his grandson, now sleeping peacefully in Jenny's arms. "You know what my father used to say? A lie travels fast, but the truth travels far." Today proved him right. Lisa looked around the diner, at the current and former employees sharing stories, at the television still discussing journalistic integrity, at her buzzing phone full of messages from people wanting to add their voices to the truth. "I was wrong about something else," she said quietly. "What's that?" Mike asked. "I thought publishing this follow-up would damage my career. Instead, it might be the most important story I've ever written. Not because it corrected a mistake, but because it showed that the truth still matters. that it's never too late to set the record straight. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, illuminating the gathering of people brought together by truth. Outside, the world was still buzzing about the dramatic turnaround, the reporter who challenged her own story, the evidence that changed everything. But here in Joey's diner, surrounded by the very community she'd once misrepresented, Lisa Brooks finally understood what real journalism was about. Not chasing headlines or confirming biases, but seeking and serving the truth, no matter where it leads, no matter what it costs. Her phone buzzed one more time. A message from her journalism professor from college. "This is what integrity looks like. You've done our profession proud." Lisa looked at Mike, who was now showing his grandson's pictures to the gathered employees. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked up. "For what?" "For not giving up on the truth. For making me listen. For teaching me what real investigative journalism looks like." Mike smiled. Sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we go looking for. They're the ones that find us when we're ready to hear them. The diner hummed with conversations, laughter, and the sound of truth being shared. Outside, a new hashtag was trending. #JournalismRight. And in a booth at Joey's diner, surrounded by the very people whose lives she'd misrepresented and who had forgiven her, Lisa Brooks learned the most important lesson of her career. Sometimes the biggest story isn't about exposing what's wrong. Sometimes it's about revealing what's right.